Welcome to How to Identify and Leverage Influencers to Amplify and Legitimize Your Event.
And actually, this is someone I'm really excited to introduce, been a fan for a long time. This is Mike Alton, strategic consultant and keynote speaker at the Social Media Hat. Mike is an international keynote speaker, an award-winning consultant, and head of strategic partnerships at Agora Pulse, where he strengthens relationships with social media educators, influencers, and partner brands. Mike, take it away.
Thank you.
All right. Good morning, Las Vegas. So, in 1903, decades before computers and before even typewriters, the preferred method of communication was the fountain pen. The predecessor to today's digital and ballpoint pens, the fountain pen was elegant, it was beautiful, and it was prone to extreme messiness. Those who partook in the extended use of such instruments were clearly and literally marked. It was in that year that the Conklin Pen Company in Toledo, Ohio, decided to employ influencer marketing, though, of course, we didn't call it back then. Influencer marketing is a relatively recent term. Throughout the 20th century, brands, event organizers, and businesses turned to celebrities for endorsements and to serve as spokespeople for the brands. Imagine if Conklin had turned to Major League Baseball player Babe Ruth as the spokesman for their brand. I mean, other than signing fat contracts, Babe wasn't exactly known for his prolific use of the quiet quill. Conklin knew better than to use just any old influencer. They understood that if they wanted everyday folks to be interested in their pens, they needed an influencer with whom everyday folks could relate and whom it would make sense to tie to the brand. And so that's our first lesson and criteria when it comes to influencer marketing, brand fit. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's review a couple of preliminary concepts. Influencer marketing. It's anytime an individual with an audience is able to exert some influence over that audience, usually on behalf of a brand, which means you don't have to be a mega movie star to be an influencer. A local member of your community could, in fact, be the best possible influencer for your brand or for your events. So we therefore break influencers down into a number of categories, depending largely on the size of their audience. Mega influencer, just like the early 1900s, is going to be a movie star or an athlete of today. They're going to have millions of followers on social media. They're going to reach a huge number of people across a wide demographic, but you're going to pay dearly for that exposure. Down a tier, we find the macro influencer with 100,000 to about 1 million social media followers. These are people who have largely developed their audience on social media and might be in a specific category like food or travel, making it a bit easier to find an influencer at this level that aligns with a particular brand. Down a tier, we have the micro influencer at 1,000 to just under 100,000 followers. Though, of course, someone with 100,000 social media fans could be said to have a great deal of influence, particularly if they've stayed focused on a particular niche. Now, it's at these smaller levels that we start to run into some challenges when it comes to finding and working with influencers. Everybody knows who the mega influencers are, and they've got experienced staff to handle campaign requests. Joe the vlogger may have never worked with a brand before, so you've got to be prepared for that. Finally, at the lowest tier, that nano influencer, someone with less than 1,000 social media fans, somebody who might not even be using social media, but might be a very prominent influencer in the community and therefore a fantastic outlet for your brand to work with them or for your event to work with them. And so, while I would love to just assume that you're all here because you've already been sold on the idea of influencer marketing and you just want to go about it the right way, maybe that's not you. Maybe you've seen some of the horror stories in the news of influencers padding their stats or acting like divas. And you're like, Mike, influencer marketing is not for me. Old school sales is the way to go. Except your customers today, they're not as interested in talking to salespeople, but they will listen to influencers. And the brand or the event that takes the time to build a lasting influencer program built on deep relationships with those influencers can expect to scale their content creation, reach new audiences, and establish more trust with their audience. And it's that trust that's going to determine whether they buy or attend your event or somebody else's. So if you want to be top of mind and tip of tongue, influencer marketing is a terrific means to that end. But you'll often hear me talk about things like brand ambassadors and influencer programs, not just influencer marketing. What does that mean? What's the difference between, say, a brand ambassador and an influencer? Well, a brand ambassador is an influencer who goes beyond paid marketing campaigns. They're not someone that you would simply pay to send a tweet. There's an ongoing level of activity there, which is why we need a formal program in place to manage that. So now we get into the meat, what we're going to talk about today. How to leverage influencers, how to build a program, how to develop long-lasting relationships with influencers, people who want to work with you, the kind of people that Ken Blanchard might refer to as a raving fan. And before we get into that, I should point out that everything I'm about to say could be managed by a CMO, a social media manager, an event organizer. You don't necessarily need to hire somebody just to manage your influencers. You will, however, need to spend a little bit of time up front getting the whole program started and documented. Starting with making sure that everybody in your organization is on the same page when it comes to goals and expectations. There is a lot that influencers can do for us, from brand awareness to sales and registrations. But remember that earlier slide where we showed you nano influencers with under 1,000 followers? You couldn't expect a nano influencer to send a tweet and drive 5,000 registrants for your event. The math's not there. That's not likely to happen, right? So get on the same page. And now what we'll do is think about the criteria for determining what kinds of influencers we want to work with. The first criteria, I already mentioned it earlier, it's brand fit. This is the degree to which a particular influencer's voice, style, message, culture align with that of the representing brand. In other words, how alike is the influencer and the brand. Helps if you've already thought about your own brand in terms of style, voice, message, and culture. Have a style guide where you'd have the aesthetics like font, logo treatment, colors, but also what is your brand or your event's message? What is your voice? What is your culture? That'll make determination of brand fit for a particular influencer a lot easier. The second criteria is the category of the influencer, i.e. mega influencer, which means your available budget. So once you've got those two criteria in mind, it's time to start looking for influencers. And we've got a number of areas where we can start. The first thing that you're going to want to think about is the people who are already talking about your brand or your event. These could be customers. These could be past attendees. These could be partners. These might be even bloggers in your community or in your industry. The beauty here is that while these people are probably nano or micro influencers, they're already fans of your brand. They've already got content that you can amplify. They've got a track record that you can evaluate. They're probably also more affordable. Second option is to think about the biggest names in your industry, people who are already creating content in and about your industry, speaking at industry events like this one. These people, the benefit is that they're already top of mind. You're already following them on Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram. You're not going to have to do a lot of research to come up with this list. But that implies a third approach, and one that you are going to have to do regardless, and that is research. Researching influencers will take time, but it will also be extremely rewarding because through your research, you will find influencers that you have never previously heard of, and yet will make a terrific addition to your brand. So to do that, to research, you can start with the native platforms. Facebook, YouTube, whatever platform that makes the most sense for your event or brand. But I recommend using a tool like BuzzSumo. With BuzzSumo, you can search networks like Facebook or Twitter. BuzzSumo will also search the web for content creators and authors who have published content. And you're going to search based on keywords that are appropriate for you and your event. And then you can filter those results by geolocation, by language. Then you can drill down and you can see exactly what that influencer published and where, and whether it would have made sense to include your brand or event in that content. If so, great. You found a new potential influencer. Write them down. Go back to your research. You can also search tools like Analytica that are databases of tens of thousands of influencers. So those tend to be more B2C. If that's what you're looking for, great. But B2C is going to be Analytica. Let me get a drink. So as you begin to find influencers, you're going to want to keep track of them. You can use a Google Sheet, although I recommend Nimble. Nimble is a CRM system. It's designed to track contacts. It's excellent for influencer marketing because as you find influencers through your research, you're going to pop them into Nimble, and Nimble will scour the web and find all their websites, all their social profiles, and all their contact information. If you're using BuzzSumo, BuzzSumo will tell you what their Twitter profile is, which you can click on, and then use Nimble's Chrome extension to import them into Nimble. Tag them as an influencer, return to your research. While you're on networks like Twitter and TikTok and that sort of thing, you're also going to want to be paying attention to the conversations that take place. These are discussions that influencers might be jumping into. Again, people that you might not see in your normal research or be aware of. And for that, you're going to want a third tool. That's Agorapulse. Agorapulse is a social media management solution. But with the power of Agorapulse, you can set up smart searches around specific hashtags, even around a specific influencer. And again, you can geofence them and limit it and sort it however you want. All of these are designed to help you surface influencers that you can begin to foster relationships with. Relationships. That's a word you're going to hear me use over and over again. I'm stressing this now because you might begin to search for influencers and you might find a couple and think, oh, great, let's just rush into the courtship phase rather than going back and looking for more. But the thing is, relationships take time. And we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket, as the adage says, right? When you reach out to a brand new influencer, some of them are going to be excited to work with you. Others, not so much. And the problem with any relationship is that we do not know in advance how it's going to go. These are essentially blind dates. I don't want to say that there are no shortcuts to building a great relationship because I'm about to share a bunch with you, but none of it matters unless you're able to build rapport with each individual influencer one at a time. Did I mention relationships take time? I did? Cool. But the thing is, if you do everything we talk about today and you build up a really robust influencer program, the odds of creating a successful, beneficial, positive relationship in a shorter amount of time increases dramatically. So, go back, try to come up with 25 to 50 potential influencers if you can, and then begin sparking relationships with all of them. So let's talk about how we do that. First thing you're going to want to do is to connect with each of those influencers on their preferred social network. Just glance in Nimble or whatever tool you're using. Are they big into TikTok, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, Snapchat? What doesn't matter. You look at where they're most active and engaged and connect with them there. And note that there is a difference between connect and follow, depending on the network that we're talking about. Connections have to be two-way approved, whereas a follow is one-way. And I mention that because if the influencer doesn't know you, they're not going to be inclined to connect with you. It's far easier to follow them if the network allows it. So you connect with them. And then you begin to engage with them on that preferred social network. Now, I can't tell you what to say in response to their posts because that's obviously depending on the post. But here are some helpful guidelines. First, spend a little time every day engaging with one post per influencer per day. Shares are the most meaningful form of engagement. You're telling that influencer through your share that you trust their content enough to share it with your own audience. Comments are where we have discussions that demonstrate similarities in thought. This is where we begin to develop rapport. Likes and similar reactions are nice for staying top of mind, but they're not very meaningful. Now, you may like, comment on, and share an individual post from an influencer, but be wary of doing that too often or of liking every single thing that they publish. Some might see you as a raving fan. Others might just think you're raving. So let's not do that. Instead, spend about half an hour a day going through your list of targeted influencers and engaging where it makes sense to do so. While we're doing this, we are personally observing the rest of the activity that happens around these posts, which is the third criteria for determining the influencers that we want to work with: audience engagement. We want to know, are we the only one who's commenting and engaging on their posts? Is it the same people every time, or is there a nice variety, a diverse group of people that are commenting and engaging with that influencer's content? And then how does the influencer respond? Are you the only one? Do they reply to each and every comment, or are they kind of ignoring you and everybody else? What's the tone and the style of those responses? If an influencer was replying to a comment as you, with your name and your brand logo, how comfortable would you be? As we go through this process, we'll be paying attention, and we will be coming to an understanding of what their worldview is, what they think about things that are important to us and our target audience. And as they begin to respond positively and we begin to develop rapport personally with that influencer, it'll be time to take that relationship to the next level, and that's collaboration. At Agorapulse, as was so nicely mentioned, I'm the head of strategic partnerships. I've been running our virtual events at Agorapulse since 2018. I run massive virtual summits. Every single quarter, thousands of people sign up for and attend these events. And one of the tactics that I use is to work with our influencers. I run in the influencer marketing program. So I work with social media marketers and educators around the world. And when I'm running an event, a Facebook Live, a webinar, or one of these virtual events, I've got no shortage of guest experts to tap. They love participating in our events. That's a winning approach that any one of you could take over and over again. Influencers love to have the light shined on them. So the other thing that I'm doing is, because I'm leveraging influencers in my events, they're helping me to create content. They're helping me to reach their audiences. They're helping me to establish social proof for my event. This is Dr. Jonah Berger in that picture. Anybody recognize Jonah Berger, author of Contagious? Yeah. He's a Wharton professor, published author, Wall Street Journal award-winning author. If you're not in marketing, you probably wouldn't know him, but he's really big in the marketing world. And that's who I'm trying to reach, right? When I show a prospect or a potential attendee that I've got Jonah Berger keynoting one of my events, they want to sign up. One of the really cool things is when I go to another influencer and I say, hey, would you like to work with us on our virtual event? Would you like to be on a panel? Jonah Berger's keynoting. Their eyes light up. Yeah, okay. I'll share a stage with Jonah Berger, please. I mean, think about a big name in your industry and insert it where I'm saying Jonah Berger, and it will have the same impact. You're adding social proof and authority just by your association with a key influencer. Getting that first key influencer is a challenge, I get it. But once you start to get some of those names, that adds clout and reputation to your brand or your events, makes everything else easier. If you want to start smaller, you can start with some social media content, or having them write a blog post for you or a review. Maybe they've got a newsletter and you can ask them about being a part of their newsletter. Maybe they're talking about things that are happening in and around Las Vegas. And you're like, hey, I've got an event coming up, a concert in a couple months. Can we get that in your newsletter? Your audience would love it. That's a great way to get started. But at some point, you're going to want to start to talk about compensation. And we'll get to that in a second. But when you're building these campaigns for influencers, whether it's to promote a specific event or your brand or a chain of events, there's a number of things that we're going to want to think about. The first is, how can we make sure that this campaign lasts long enough to reach a sizable portion of their audience? I mentioned very briefly at the outset, we don't want to pay an influencer just to send a tweet. You guys know why? A tweet lives for 18 minutes. I tweeted before I got on stage here. Nobody else is seeing that tweet now. It's been too long, right? And I was promoting this event as an influencer. So to get them to tweet once, that's not going to do a whole lot for us. I have 50,000 followers on Twitter, and I'm not saying that to brag, but just to demonstrate, my average tweet reaches 500. And a good portion of those people are not going to be here in Vegas. They're not going to be interested in that event. What we want is a series of activities to reach more and more people, right? But we also want to have a shorter amount of time so that we limit our risk and additional cost. The activities have to be educational. We have to teach their audience about our event or our products or our services, however we're working with that influencer. But it's also got to be entertaining. This is social media. People aren't going there to learn about an event. They're going there to be entertained, at least to an extent. So it should be lighthearted and fun and entertaining. And it needs to result in assets which can be reused and repurposed over time. Suppose you want to work with a micro-influencer in your community to educate their audience about your event. You might come up with a topic, an angle that's of real interest to that influencer and relevant to that audience, and of course relevant to your event or your brand. Make sure you've got a hashtag so you can track everything. Have some content that they can share, some articles, yours or other people's, about the event or about that relevant topic. And maybe have a live video interview at the end to talk about the topic and the event with the influencer to culminate the campaign. After which you will have reached a sizable portion of their audience. You will have driven traffic back to your web properties, and you'll have a great piece of video content, which can be reused and repurposed in any number of ways. Now, when it comes to compensation, you guys have a lot of options, starting with free. Many influencers will be happy to work with you at little to no cost. Like I said, I'm running these virtual events every single quarter. They typically have 20 to 50 speakers, and I'm typically only paying the keynote speakers, people who are professional speakers. Almost every other speaker at my events, they're unpaid. They're volunteers because I'm helping them as much as they're helping me. So you want to think about that, but you can offer corporate swag. You can offer products or services if you have that option. Certainly if it's a speaker, you're giving them access to a stage. Maybe you're giving them access to the registrants as a possible compensatory approach. And of course, you could maybe give them affiliate commissions if it's a paid event, increased commissions, one-time payments, and ongoing payments. Just make sure that no matter how you're approaching your influencers, you're balancing generosity with practicality. Make sure that you're giving them something valuable in exchange for what you're expecting in return. And it's also helpful to make sure that every month and every quarter that you're doing these kinds of activities, you're reviewing the results. Don't just assume your influencer marketing is working. And it's helpful to have those conversations with the influencers themselves. How else can you help them be a more vocal advocate for your brand or your events? Because remember, influencer marketing is all about building brand awareness. But that leads us to the final topic that we want to talk about, success. How do we know whether our influencer marketing is successful? Now, I mentioned at the outset with the Conklin Pen Company in 1903. Who do you think they might have gone with in 1903 to espouse the use of their fountain pens? Someone who fits all the criteria we talked about above? None other than Mark Twain. Twain was the author of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, Life on the Mississippi, Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. He was known throughout the country as someone who penned his thoughts regularly. Clearly, he could be seen using and enjoying something like a fountain pen. So Conklin paid him to endorse the Crescent pen, and he was quoted as saying, "I prefer it to 10 other fountain pens because it carries its filler in its own stomach, and I cannot mislay it, even by art or intention. Also, I prefer it because it is a profanity saver. It cannot roll off the desk." Thank you. So, doubtless, that resulted in more sales, but it also resulted in assets they were able to repurpose for over a century. To this day, you can get a Conklin fountain pen with Mark Twain's signature and endorsement. But what about you? How do you determine the success of your influencer marketing? Well, due to the density of icebergs, it is not uncommon for large slabs of ice to just float through the ocean with nothing but the tip visible above the water. Yet the rest of the iceberg is huge. Influencer marketing is exactly the same. There are some things we can measure: reach, clicks, registration, sales. What we can't measure is how often someone heard about our event and signed up a week later after they heard about it from the influencer. We can't measure how their perceptions changed, hopefully positively, as a result of the information from and the association with that influencer. Simply put, this is brand awareness, and it cannot be simply measured. But if your influencer marketing is executed well, it will result in a positive impact on the most important metric of all, your business bottom line. Thank you. We have like a minute for questions, but I'll be around afterwards if we don't have enough time to hit your questions. Anyone have any questions?
I do. It's really more like you're. Yeah. So because he just doesn't have the headphone. So I can get closer. So my question is more around live event coverage.
What's that?
Live event coverage for social media and how Twitter was very, very, very good for that. Very good and no replacement. But I just wanted your kind of thoughts on what you think people should be doing for live event coverage.
I have literally paid influencers to live tweet my events. Absolutely. Now, for me, I have the added benefit of working in social media. So all the people I'm talking to, they're on Twitter, they're on LinkedIn, that sort of thing. So I have to think about that from your audience perspective. You know, are they going to be on social media during the event? The better perspective is the people who aren't in the room during the event. Will they be on social media? Will they start to generate their own internal FOMO because they're seeing all this conversation about this event that they're not at? And will that help you for the next event? And so you're going to want to think that through and think about how I can leverage that as an event organizer. How can I make sure I'm tapping into that audience and bringing them along with me for the next event? Absolutely. Great question. Cool. Thank you.